Welcome to Soul Night Live, episode number 119. Today our guest is Simon Phillips, and our co-host is Eric Sanders. Welcome, Simon. Good to see you.
Hello, good to be here. Yeah.
Well, I thought we'd get the ball rolling with some questions that my friend Eric has. He's a teacher at the local Atlanta Institute of Music. We kind of collaborated on these questions, so go ahead and get the ball rolling there, Eric.
All right, terrific. Yeah, Simon, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. I'd like to go back to the very beginning. I believe you were born right-handed. How early did you develop your legendary ambidextrous playing? Was it something a teacher of yours encouraged you to do? Or perhaps a drummer you knew suggested it or influenced you? Or did you simply realize early on in your development just how beneficial it would be for you to play open-handed and have your original dominant hand free to play melodically around the kit?
It's a long question.
There'll be a lot of those.
Yeah. Well, yes, I'm basically right-handed. I was born right-handed and grew up right-handed and started playing drums right-handed. It was around 1973 that I first heard, actually it was a little bit earlier than that. I first heard Billy Cobham play on a record. It was also oh God, I've forgotten the name of it. Zarathustra, also Sprack Zarathustra, by Deodato. And so in those days, I would, if I heard something on the radio that I really liked, I would then go out and buy the record and then put it on and play to it. I'd learn it and play to it, at that time, I was, how old was I? I was about 15, I think, 14 or 15. So I was already on the road with my dad, or already been professional since 1969. And most of the records I could play pretty much too, but that particular record started off with this really fast, what I thought was a single stroke roll at the time. And I thought, I heard it, yeah. And then I tried to play it and I went, whoa, hang on a minute, who's this guy? And I found out I really enjoyed it. So I actually got the album and then I could see who was playing on the record. And I saw this name, Billy Cobham. I went, wow. So I obviously started to, become a fan of Billy's. And then somebody introduced me to the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And that I went, whoa, what's all this about? A little bit late, because I probably didn't hear In a Mounting Flame until 1973, because I was still only 15, just about getting to 16. So I was a little bit late with hearing In a Mounting Flame, and then I heard Birds of Fire, and I heard two bass drums, and I was never really into a double bass drum kit, because I was into Buddy Rich, Peter Erskine, Danny Seraphine. They all played single kick, one rack tom and two floors. And at that time, that's what my kit was. It was a Heyman kit, 22-inch bass drum, 13-inch rack tom, 14-14, and a 16-16. And that was like the kit that I really wanted. But looking at the Ludwig 1972 catalog, I think it was, on the cover is a picture of this amazing drum kit full of concert toms. It's called the Ludwig Octopus. And I remember thinking, what does that sound like? I couldn't imagine having these tom-toms of all these different sizes. And I already, as soon as I added that third tom, or that middle tom, that 14,
right,
I already started getting the concept of tuning, tonality, and using them in a kind of musical way within the music. And I knew even then I knew that's, wow, I want to start adding tom-toms, Of course, I couldn't afford a Ludwig Octopus at that stage. I think the first thing I got was an extra rack tom. I'm trying to remember here. No, I know what it was. So fast forward a little bit towards midway through 73. My father died very suddenly and had to break up the band, blah, blah, blah. And I was out of work for a little bit. And then I was able to get an audition for Jesus Christ Superstar, which was probably the biggest show in London at that time, at the Cambridge, at the Palace Theatre in Cambridge Circus. Beautiful theatre. And the show had been running for about a year. And the reason I got the audition was one of the keyboard players used to play with my dad. And this was the keyboard player who kept turning me on to all these great records. So every time we went on a gig, he'd bring me another couple of albums to listen to. He introduced me to Chick Corea, Now He Sings, Now He Sobs. He introduced me to Don Ellis, and of course Mahavishnu. And it was like, wow, you know. And he was always a beautiful piano player too. And we got on really well because he was really into modern music. Remember, I was playing Dixieland with my dad.
Right.
Very, very 30s swing / Dixie, you know. So, and I didn't want to play that anymore. And they were looking for they weren't happy with the drummer at the time, and they were looking for someone else, and he put my name forward. And that's when I got the audition. And nerve-wracking, but I got the job. And I became, I was the youngest person in London playing professionally, basically,
Yeah.
So now my drum kit was installed at the Cambridge, at the Palace Theatre. We were set up on the stage. So it was quite tricky to get the kit out and then do a session and then get back in time to get the kit set up and back up onto the thing. So you had to lift it up onto the platform that we were on at the front of the stage. It was a nightmare because I was starting to be asked to play sessions by the cast in the production, and that's how in those days that's how it started. We didn't have demos. We went and made the demos. We were the session musicians that played on the demos because we were not. I wasn't. I was still just starting out. And then when, of course, they got their record deal, then they'd hire real session musicians, the experienced guys, and pay them more. And, that's kind of how it worked. So I had to get a second drum kit, which was quite extravagant at the time. But in order to be able to go to a studio and remain set up for maybe 2 days, but then have to get to Jesus Christ Superstar to play the show in the evening, I couldn't take the kit down. The engineer, producer wouldn't let me, they wouldn't want to do that after they've mic'd it up, So I went to I had a deal with Heyman at the time, and I got a second Heyman kit. It was a gold finished kit, but it was awful. I just went, no, this is not gonna fly, in studios doing. So, and I was always a huge Ludwig fan. And I thought, I'm going to have to, spend more money and get a Ludwig kit. So luckily they were distributed by the same company, Arbiter. So I called the guy there and I said, look, this Heyman kit's not working out. Can I bring it back and exchange it for a Ludwig and pay the difference? He said, yeah, of course you can. So they were great. They were lovely. Off I went and they gave me this black Ludwig kit, and it was only a 4-piece kit. But so that was kind of the start of it. I now had 2 kits. One kit in a studio when I was working, which I carted around in my car, but I couldn't drive then. So I had to always get someone else to drive. Or rather, I could drive. I was driving when I was 8 years old, but I wasn't allowed to drive. In England, it's gearbox and steering wheel up here, barely reach the pedals, But we used to, if we could get an old place to drive in, we would drive, just borrow your mom's car and, off you go. Don't crash it. So it's a bit long, this explanation, but really what it was, now I started getting into this thing of having extra toms. So I got an extra tom. So now I had 2 racks, 2 floors, and I wanted to start using double bass drum. So I got an extra bass drum. This is for the Heyman kit, not the Ludwig kits. I couldn't afford those at the time. Midnight blue it was. And I think I was doing so many sessions at that time. This was about a year after I'd done Jesus Christ Superstar. I had to keep putting a dep in to play because I was busy in studios. And then eventually I had to make that decision. I think I need to leave Superstar, which means saying goodbye to a salary, a weekly, monthly payment. But I'm getting enough sessions now. Maybe it'll work. And so I finished up there and I had an album to do. It was with the first band that I'd actually joined. And so I thought, right, I'm going to do this album with 2 bass drums, 2 rack toms, 2 floor toms. And that was the first time I used a double bass drum on any recording. I didn't even know really what to do with them, And I remember we were playing this one tune. It was called Laughing Tackle, and it was a shuffle, basically. We were covering it from another band. And I thought, that's a bit boring. Why don't I play it as like a 12/8 with double kick, like a Meeting of the Spirits, but with 2 bass drums, but a shuffle on top of that. So, right now the problem is, I'm still playing right-handed. Do you lead with the left foot or do you lead with the right foot? And so that would mean that the backbeat, if you lead with the right foot, would come in with your left foot, right? Mm-hmm. And if you lead with the left foot, that means it would come with the right foot, which was awkward. And we were just I was about to count it in, and I was thinking, should I lead with the left? Should I lead with the right? Shit, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? 1, 2, right, 2, 3. And I started, and I did the whole take. I was like this, I like holding on, like, a piece of rock like this. So I thought any moment I'm going to lose it. It's going to go blah, 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 But that was the first recorded track of double bass drum, which was 1974, October.
And what album was that?
It was an album called Chopin with a Y. And that was the name of the band. We were signed to Don Arden, Jet Records. And we were a band for about a year, no, less than a year, I think. It was a bit of a shame, but it was a great band. And we supported ELO, Electric Light Orchestra. We supported Return to Forever at 1 gig.
Wow.
So now I'm playing with this band. I'm still playing right-handed, but I think I went to see Billy Cobham play in 1974. And when he came out on stage, I noticed he was playing left-handed. And I went, wow, that looks so cool. Now, remember, I'm 17 years old now. Looks are everything. And I used to spend ages setting up my drum kit to make it set up the coolest way I could, which was basically to look like somebody else's kit, another drummer's kit that I was into, And then a few months later, I saw Lenny White, and I was on stage. I was right behind him because we were playing, so I had a backstage pass, and he was lefty too. And I went, oh, it just looks so cool. I love the fact that you could get around the tom-toms without, and it meant that more freedom. So that's how it started. But also with this band, I added more tom-toms. That was the other thing. And then we have the hi-hat problem. And the tom-tom, in order to clear the hi-hat, has to be really high, the 10-inch, which actually then was a 12-inch. We couldn't get a 10-inch in those days. It just looked horrible. And I'm 17, looks at everything. So I took the hi-hat away, set the kit up, and all 4 toms like this look great. And then I went, now, what am I going to do with this hi-hat? In the Ludwig catalog, there was a hi-hat called the Mid-Boy. And that was the hi-hat that they shipped with the Ludwig Octoplus, because they knew they had a problem with having a hi-hat. Now, I don't know if anybody could actually use that hi-hat, but that was what it was called. And I've looked everywhere and I can't find a Mid-Boy hi-hat. So there's plenty of regular Atlas hi-hats around, Ludwig hi-hats, but I couldn't find a Mid-Boy. But anyway, I got the hacksaw out. I sawed it and sawed the rod and set it up.
Yeah.
Right. And now I thought, how am I going to play this thing? And I had another hi-hat. Don't worry. I mean, I had the other hi-hat for when I had to do a session or gig or something like that. But and that's what did it. I thought, I'm going to teach myself how to play lefty, because one day I want to buy a Ludwig Octopus. And most of the teaching was on a sofa arm in my rented flat in Kensington. And I used to play along to records, and I used to listen to the tone of the sticks on the armchair, on the sofa arm, and notice the difference between the right hand and the left hand, the way it sounded, and then swap it over and try to replicate that so the left hand sounded like the right hand. So it's not just figuring out what to play, it's figuring out how to make it sound. And that was a big thing, because otherwise it would your left hand is going to sound weaker. Imagine that's on the hi-hat, and your right hand is now playing the snare drum. It can't do all the little ghost notes. It's not used to doing it. Correct. So that's what I did. So I played like 4 bars right-handed, and then swap it over and try to make it sound the same. And then go back to right-handed to remind myself, right, okay, I need to do that. And then, and I would position them actually in a different place, so I could actually hear closer, more distinctly, the difference of sound. And that's basically how I started doing it. And I'd turn up to sessions and lower the hi-hat, keep a ride cymbal on the right hand, just in case, in case of fire, break glass, it's kind of that concept. And I would start to do all these sessions left-handed. And then I'd go into the control room and listen really carefully how it sounded. And it made me sound like a different drummer, which I loved. So I didn't really like the way I sounded. So that was the start of it. And I never looked back. I was 18 years old when I actually committed to the change.
Incredible. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Sorry, long, but, yeah.
Well, you mentioned your dad's band, and that's up next here in my line of questioning. What was it like playing in your dad's Dixieland band as a preteen? I know the keyboard player was wonderful with you, but did any of the adult players ever give you a hard time and complain about nepotism? Were there any moments that helped shape you as both a person and professional musician?
You used a word there. It was a bit long, and I don't know that word. I'm a drummer, simple word. It was very interesting. My dad was, he was one of the leading band leaders in England at that time. People didn't argue with him. He's also been around a long time. He was already, when I joined the band, he was 61 years old, and I was 12. So most of the people that he employed for the band, they wouldn't say anything. Now, I think we have to look at the reason why I ended up playing in his band, because there's a really very specific reason. I'm 12 years old. I'm totally inexperienced, and I can play. Technically, I was able to read music, and I was able to play the tunes, but, I didn't sound like a 20-year-old. The problem was in 1969, his style of music was basically created in the 30s. His first band he formed in 1925, and he was on tour in Europe, including Germany, in the 30s, which must have been a very interesting place to be. In those days, you would do 6-month residencies. So he would take his band over to, I don't even know if they even flew in those days. They probably took the ship and drove or train through France, to Germany. He would spend 6 months in Berlin in a jazz club, and then move down to Munich, and then move up to Frankfurt and wherever. And of course, when you spend that long in a country, you learn to speak the language. So he was a fluent German speaker. So his style of music was really like, imagine Artie Shaw, Benny Goodman in the 30s. And so it was what I call organized Dixieland. It wasn't your tip. When you hear the word Dixieland, you think of trombone, trumpet, and clarinet, and they're all riffing around the melody, right? But no, all his music was written and very heavily arranged. So he had 4 front line. He had alto, doubling on a baritone, tenor, trumpet, trombone, and he was the clarinet. So basically 5th. He would be the one that would do the Dixieland stuff around the melody, but everybody else had to read the chart. I mean, exactly. If I hit a cymbal crash and it wasn't written, I'd get a bollocking for it. Mm. Oh yeah, it was very, very strict. So here's the problem. 1969, most drummers in England, they didn't want to play like that. They wanted to, if they were jazz drummers, they wanted to play like Elvin Jones, and if they were more into the rock thing, then they want to play rock. There were very few drummers that could really or wanted to, and therefore could play that style of music. Now, I grew up playing that music. It's in me. I can't help it. I mean, I can't play it now, but back then I could. And my father came back from a gig, again, angry as shit. Bloody drummer this, bloody drummer that. Can't, too many cymbals, too many kick drum, we didn't call it kick drum in those days, bass drum beats. And my mom was getting really tired of this. She said, okay, enough. You have a bloody good drummer here in the house. Take him out on the road. And he said, well, he's 12 years old. He's got his school. I said, yeah, he's not exactly doing very well at school, is he? And I wasn't exactly academic, all I wanted to do was play drums and play cricket, that was about it. And I guess they discussed it. I didn't know anything about this, by the way. And the trumpet player, who was kind of like the second in command, they talked with him about it, and he said the same thing. He said, you know what? I absolutely understand. Yes, we'll have a kid out on the road with us. We'll have a very inexperienced musician, but boy, is he going to learn. And, he seems a good kid. He seems like he's going to be very disciplined. Now, I was going to, boarding school in those days. So, we all had that. And I had quite a military background, upbringing anyway, with 2 military parents, So they thought, let's do this. And then I was informed by my headmaster one day, said, here's the choice. You can either stay at this school or you'll have to leave and then you can play with your father's band. What a choice, right? To a 12-year kid. Oh, let me think. No, I think I'd much rather study Latin and algebra. Are you kidding me? I'll go out and play Dixieland. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful.
That was it. I left the school before any exams. And my first show was in September of 1969. And it was purely because I understood and could play the music. Now, the rest of the band had to put up with my dynamics. I'm playing as loud as I can.
I was going to say loud, louder, and loudest.
Yeah, but in those days, because of the style, it wasn't really that loud because we didn't hit rim shots. It was I played traditional grip and everything, and I was used to kind of playing at that level. But unfortunately, my right foot wasn't. And the alto player who used to set up right in front of my kick drum with his alto and his baritone. One day we were one gig. Well, like every song is 4 on the floor, right on the kick drum. Mm-hmm. Bang, 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 like this. Now my dad loved it because he said, finally, think of Gene Krupa, right? That style, right? Always. Yep. I mean, obviously he's feathering the bass drum and then accenting, but it's kind of that. And he was just happy. Now he had the groove. It was the groove that that was back. It was raw, untrained, juvenile, but dead on groove for that kind of music. And one day in the bus, this horn player had just had enough. And he was the youngest guy in the band apart from me. He was 30. And he said, right, Simon, the bass drum, it's not meant to be played triple forte for the whole evening. And I went, oh. And he's the alto player. He enlightened me and taught me about how to play the bass drum. He wasn't a drummer at all, but he's a professional musician. He knows what a drummer should sound, especially if he sits in front of him all night, you know? That's
Sure.
you know, that's the groove. So I started practicing, you know, getting much lighter on the bass drum and accenting the cymbals. Now, my dad didn't say a thing. He rarely said a thing, actually, but he'd wave his hands if I was slowing down or speeding up, you know. So it was very, very disciplined, and therefore the guys in the band were all fine, you know.
Oh, that's terrific.
It was very interesting experience.
That's incredible. This next one's going to be a little bit long. In 1976, you recorded David Coverdale's first solo album, which was called Whitesnake, after he left Deep Purple. Most folks associate what became the band Whitesnake with their MTV music that was immensely popular over a decade later. How did the studio sessions come about, and what was recording like? Roger Glover, the bassist from Deep Purple, was the producer. Did you get to hear the songs before the session, or did you just lay down tracks in the studio, hearing the music for the first time? This music had horns, female backing vocalists, and a wide variety of feels and styles. In fact, it had more to do with the Allman Brothers Band, which was Coverdale's favorite group at the time, than it did with the hair metal genre he later became known for.
Right. Well, it was Roger Glover. This was 1976. By that time, I was doing pretty much every day, 3 sessions a day. Wow. 2 drum kits, piggybacking through London studios. And I was then getting known in the London studio community with all the engineers, producers, and session musicians. And they were all great. Most of them were great. But yeah, I mean, I was now a fully fledged professional studio musician in London at 19 years old. So Roger wanted to do a solo album, and he contacted one of the contractors that used to book me and said, look, I'm looking for a drummer. And of course they said, well, we have just the guy. And he said, but he's very young. I said, well, how old is he? He's 19. And he went, really? Well, maybe I should meet him. So I get this call. Would you go up and meet Roger Glover? He lives in Buckingham, and gave me the address. And I went, yeah, when? And they gave me the time and the day, you know. So I drove out, and, you know, of course, big rock stars mansion, you know, drive, park, and I'm very nervous. I mean, I'm like, you know, I ding dong or whatever. And he opens the door and he looks at me and he goes, I'm Simon Phillips. And yeah, okay, well, come on in. And we talked for a little bit. He made a cup of tea, and I didn't really have much to say in those days. I mean, I was pretty starstruck. I was like, wow, this is Deep Purple. Wow, you know, but I didn't let anybody know that. So I was kind of a little bit standoffish in a way, in a very British way, you know. I would never let the artists that I was working with, I would never let them know I was a fan, because I felt that was very unprofessional. You know, for some people that would put them off, certain artists. They don't want to have somebody in the studio who's like a, you know, real fan. That it's not about that. It's about, you know, getting the job done. So anyway, he said, well, look, let's go to the studio and play. So it like most rock stars, let's say, in those days, they had a kind of makeshift studio. They weren't studios as we know them. They didn't have recording gear. And they might have had a Revox, reel-to-reel, or cassette, you know. But they had, you know, bass, amp, piano, organ, drum kit, you know, that kind of stuff. And he said, let's play. So I sat down on his Ludwig drum kit, which probably Ian Pace might have got for him or selected for him. And we started playing. And we stopped, and he left the room, and he called Jon Lord. And I know this from a much late, years and years later. He told me the story. He says, I said, I was stunned. I had to call John and get him over. I said, John, can you come over? And John said, yeah, okay. So Jon Lord came in. I'm sitting there and I'm going, is that Jon Lord? Oh, bloody hell, I've got half a Deep Purple here, you know? And he gets on the organ. We start jamming. And Roger said to me, this is way late. He said, yeah, we looked at each other. We just couldn't believe it. So I got the gig of making his record. And then every production he did, he'd book me for, which meant I got to play on Michael Schenker's record. I got to play on Judas Priest's record. I got to play on Coverdale's record, even Barbie Benton's record, you know, because whoever he was producing, he wanted me to be the drummer. Because for him, it was like, wow, we've got a real rock and roll drummer who's a session guy who can play pretty much any style and read music, you know? So that's what he's used to. He's used to Ian Pace, who, you know, beautiful, incredible rock drummer, one of my favorites, actually, in terms of his groove. So lovely, you know, and it was great technique too. But just, I always felt that's what made Purple groove so much, because he just has it, you know. So that's how I ended up doing Coverdale's record. In those days, we did not hear the music before we went into the studio because most people didn't have demos. They would play the song to you with an acoustic guitar. Sometimes, if it was a bit more complex, you'd write it down. But I remember just listening to it once, and then we go out and play it. I mean, it's a young brain, you know, and you just have that thing. You know, now of course I've got to write everything down. How many bars?
Same here. Yeah,
that's quite a few years later. You know, 50 years later or something, 40 something. So so that's how we did that record. Delal Harper played bass, Mickey Moody and Bernie Marsden played guitar. Tim Hinckley played piano. Ronnie Asprey played horn. And that they were the people in the studio laying down the basic tracks. Martin Birch was the engineer. He did a lot of engineering with Roger. And we were in the strange studio in Whitehall somewhere. Gosh, I can't remember the name of the studio, but anyway, that's what I can remember those sessions. But it was great. And David was fantastic. And right after we did that record, he called me to see if I wanted to join his band, which he had called Whitesnake. He did another record called North
Winds.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. North
and
Winds,
I have one track on that was left over from the first record.
Yeah, that's actually on this as well. It's got both of the albums.
Ah, right.
This is it's got both of them.
Yeah,
got Whitesnake and North Winds. So
I couldn't do it because I'd already joined Jack Bruce, because we made the Jack Bruce album in 1976 as well, just a little bit later that year.
Which Jack Bruce album was that?
Hell's Tricks. So I wasn't able to do Whitesnake, and I can't remember who he got initially, but you see, Whitesnake is very interesting. Purple broke up, and I think in about 70. Pace, Ashton, Lord, Powell. Do you ever hear of that band?
Yes.
Right. So after Purple, Ian Pace and Jon Lord got together with Tony Ashton, who I used to do sessions for as well. And he was in a band called Ashton, Gardner and Dyke, which I don't know how well known they were in the States, but they were quite well known in England. So Powell went out and did a whole, you know, I think they did a record and a whole bunch of touring. I actually bought a flight-cased riser off Ian because I needed it for the Jack Bruce tour, and so I knew that crew quite well. You know, all the I don't think I'd met Ian then, but I knew the road crew and stuff like that. And but what happened, which was very interesting, was Whitesnake. That Powell kind of fell to the wayside, and then I think Coverdale then rang Ian Pace and Jon Lord to join Whitesnake.
Yeah.
So that's when Whitesnake became almost Deep Purple again.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was Neil Murray on bass.
Yep.
Mickey Moody on guitar. And because I remember bumping into them in Japan, 1978, at this club, and then later in Hamburg at the CP Plaza in '81. So they were playing for quite a long time, actually. That band.
Oh yeah.
I know. I went to see. They invited me to a show. I went to see it. And the band were great, really great.
Yep.
But I just don't think it was quite getting there for some reason with Coverdale. Wasn't really happening. And then of course he changed. I think he changed management, and then of course it became the Whitesnake of the '80s that we all know, and his huge big hit. Here we go again. Here I go.
Yep. Yeah. Which was an earlier Whitesnake song. Yeah. And in there, you kind of answered my next question. It was the year later, 1977. You were the session drummer on Judas Priest's Sin After Sin album, which spawned the Diamonds and Rust, which was a Joan Baez cover, as well as Dissonant Aggressor, which was later covered by the band Slayer. And I was assuming that Roger Glover, who produced that major label release, had brought you on after working with you on Coverdale's Whitesnake record. And I guess it was probably the same thing of you just heard the songs in the studio, and that even though it was a major label release.
Actually, that was a little bit different. That was one album that was different because it was an already intact band. We actually did some rehearsals.
Oh, that was my question. Were there any rehearsals? Yeah.
Yes, there were rehearsals, but this is how we would do it. So only Glenn and Ian played. KK didn't play. He would just sit out and be a listener. And Rob, of course, would sing. And we all just, I set up my kit and blah, blah, blah. And they said, right, first one goes like this. So we just start playing. And then you stop, right, that's the first bit. And then the next bit goes like this. And that's how we pieced the song together. I mean, that's from my memory of it. But, what's interesting is, and especially reading people's autobiographies, everybody's memory is different. Sure. It's so amazing. I read a book and I read, like a Pete Townsend book or Ken Scott, and I go, no, that's not what happened. No, it happened like this. Isn't that funny? But then when I go through my old diaries of that era, and I read some of the sessions, I go, oh, I'd forgotten that, So Judas Priest sessions were actually in two parts. I only remember the first part, the part where we recorded most of the songs. And I used my Ludwig Octopus, my mahogany Ludwig Octopus. But I have a note in the diary saying that I'm using my white Ludwig, because now I had a double kit, it was made up of two big beat kits put together. So I had two 12s, two 13s, and two 16s. Not the ideal sizes, but in England, we couldn't get 14-inch tom-toms. We couldn't get 18-inch tom-toms. We just, nobody imported them. So, and that's when I started ordering direct from Manage to get my Octopus, on the phone and sending some sort of weird telegram check. I can't remember what it was called in those days, and then they'd ship it over. And but I have a note saying that I'm using the Ludwig White kit for these sessions, and I don't know which songs. I'd have to listen to the album really carefully to find out which songs I played the double head kit on, as opposed to the single heads. It's amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. That's incredible. Yeah, thank you for all that. And then a year after that, 1978, you played on half of Gary Moore's debut solo album, Back on the Streets, sharing drumming duties with Brian Downey. A lot of Thin Lizzy was on that album, which was produced by the great Chris, I'm going to butcher this name, Stangaridis? I've never known how to say it. Oh, is it? On this album, you played what I believe, well, you may dispel this now, but was the second ever double bass shuffle. When you were speaking earlier, you had already recorded one, but I always believed that this was the second on the song Hurricane. And I want to speak with you about that groove in just a little bit. For this album, can you just talk a little bit about working with the great guitar god that Gary was?
Well, we recorded at Morgan Studios. So Chris Stangaridis was a Morgan Studios engineer. So I worked with him on many, many sessions from, a few years before that. Morgan Studios was owned by a session drummer called Barry Morgan and a trumpet player, and I can't remember his name. And they were session guys. They started a studio. They started with just one studio and a bar. Now, a lot of English studios in those days had a bar and a catering. That's because people expected it. And, if you're going to have a nice studio, you've got to have a full working bar and a liquor license and everything, So they had it would have been, when they first started, it might have even been an 8-track studio, but I'm thinking it was a 16-track. And that was the downstairs studio, which I can't remember if that was Studio 1 or Studio 2. But just for the sake of this, let's say it's Studio 1. That studio is where Black Sabbath did all their recordings, Jeff Beck, Hot Chocolate, a lot of Mickey Most, the producer, he did all his productions in that studio. Then they opened another studio upstairs, which let's say is Studio 2. I might have them mixed up. I just can't remember. Now, that was a 16-track studio. They upgraded Studio 1 to a 24-track studio because the 24-track machine arrived in Britain if I'm correct, I remember arriving at Olympic Studios. They just received it, and that was 1973. Because I remember I was way into all this stuff. And in those days, you were even just about allowed into the control room. It was very different to how it is today. But you're not allowed to touch a thing. And I remember staring at this 24-track machine. I think it was an MM 1000 or 1100 Ampex. 24 VUs on the front. I'm going, head block. Well, we'd already seen a 2-inch head block, but looking at the heads, how small they are, and I'd sort of sneak up and have a quick look, and it was fascinating. So upstairs was still a 16-track studio when we recorded Back on the Streets Again. So that was actually recorded on 16-track. These sessions were, Gary was set up to my left, John Moore set up to my right, and Don Airy in the corner over there. And we laid all our tracks live. Gary was a huge fan of Jack Bruce, and I was playing with Jack at the time. So, of course, he was just asking me questions about Jack all the time. It was hilarious.
That's great.
But that's how we did it. That's how we recorded that record.
Oh, that's terrific. And then Roger Glover brought you back on studio sessions for a somewhat similar situation when Michael Schenker left the band UFO and recorded his debut eponymously titled solo album. This was 1980. I'll backtrack to 79 in a moment. And it featured the epic track Into the Arena. Do you have any memories of these sessions or that excellent song in particular?
Yeah, I remember very well. Studio was Wessex Studios. I had now just started playing with Tama. 1979 was when I started playing Tama, actually. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I had a Fiber Star kit, 222s, 12, 13, 14, 10, 12, 13, 14, 14, 16, 18, and a gong drum and octobans, 8 of them. Nice. I never liked that room. It was too dead. It was in the days just before when they started making live rooms. Virgin Townhouse had just opened, and they had that stone room, which is where Phil Collins recorded In the Air Tonight. They had just started using stone and wood as the surfaces, so they made the studios much liver. But Wessex was kind of old-fashioned and very dead, and I never liked the sound in there. Big room, but dead, bit like Olympic. So I was trying to get this live sound. So I had my the guy that I was working with Jeff Beck, sound engineer. He brought in a PA system, and we set it up and ran the drums through it. So it filled the room up with a lot of sound. I don't think it helped at all, actually, but now. But I thought it was really cool back at the time. And I was also messing around with, because I'd worked with Ken Scott, I wanted the engineer to use keypexes on all the toms to get them so he could get them really loud and present. Because the hard thing was getting tom-toms to cut through the way I wanted to hear them, I guess. As you know, my playing is quite tom-tom heavy, you know. So, but I had this weird notion, no technical knowledge at all, but I had this weird notion of, what if we keyed the key picks from a trigger on the drum that would open it even just a few hundreds of like a couple of milliseconds before I hit the drum? Because I was always suspicious of hitting the drum, the mic being, you know, anywhere from 2 to 3, 4 inches away from the drum, and only the audio signal is opening the gate. And I'm thinking, what's happening to that real initial transience? Are we losing it? And I thought, if I could have a trigger and key the key picks, so it was a sensor that would, you could set the key picks, which is noise gate, to trigger, and it would open as soon as you touch that drum head. Isn't that funny?
Big difference.
So I did, and the engineers like going, and the producer, well, Roger was there. He was okay, but the engineers going, and of course they have to get their maintenance guy, because, you know, I have these triggers which were used on the Tama synth drums that they had at the time, but they needed terminating and balance line into an XLR to go into the key picks, you know. So the maintenance guy comes with a soldering iron and a bunch of cable. I mean, he's got to, you know, do all this before we can even start playing, because I insisted that we should do this, but didn't really help. It didn't really help, because the trigger on sitting on the head dampened the head, so it took away quite a bit of the tone of the drum in the first place. So I you know, but this was the days we were still trying to kind of figure out things, sound, how to get a
experiment.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I remember from the sessions. We did rehearse. Me and Mo Foster rehearsed with Michael and Gary at a place called No Miss Rehearsal Studios in London, in Olympia. And I remember I was using a little Ludwig kit, and Michael loved the sound of that drum kit. And when we got to the sessions and I had the Tama kit all mic'd up, he didn't think it sounded as good as the Ludwig.
Wow.
Isn't that funny? But
yeah,
too late to do anything about it. But yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, backtracking to 1979, you recorded Shankar's debut solo album. You did a lot of debut solo albums for folks and got their careers on track. Frank Zappa co-wrote 2 of the songs, penned all of the lyrics, and was the producer. What was it like working with FZ? For Dead Girls of London and No More Mr. Nice Girl, did he have drum charts for you to read in the studio?
Right. That was an interesting scenario.
I bet.
I had just done my first Japanese tour in 1978 with Jeff Beck and Stanley Clarke, and I had introduced Tony. We had a keyboard player issue at the time, and they needed a keyboard player pronto, and that's when I recommended Tony Hymas, because Tony and I had done sessions. We were in the Jack Bruce band together, and you know, he was my favorite keyboard player at the time, you know. And I introduced Tony. He came for a rehearsal, and they loved him, and that became kind of the beginning of the There and Back band. So we got back from Japan, Christmas. We got into January, and I got this call. I can't remember who it was from. Said, "Look, I'm in whatever the rehearsal place was with Frank Zappa, and he's producing an Indian violin player called Shankar. You probably never heard of him." Said, "Yeah, I know Shankar. I met him years ago with Jack Bruce and John McLaughlin." I said, "Oh, great. Well, we need a drummer." "Okay. Well, when's the session?" "No, I mean now at the rehearsal place." I went, "Well, why are you all rehearsing?" So, because the drummer didn't work out. "Oh, I can get there in about an hour." So I don't even remember where my drum kit was in those days. I remember the house. Maybe they were stored in the garage. I can't remember actually. So I think I must have chucked them in the car and drove down to wherever it was and carted my Octoplus in. And I knew everybody on the session. They were session guys. I was like, oh, hi guys, this room full of people. And I see Shankar and he goes, hello, Simon. It's a long time we haven't seen. I said, yeah, nice to meet you. And then Frank comes up and goes, hi, I'm Frank. I said, Simon, of course, now I'm a huge Frank Zappa fan. But again, I'm trying to be professional. I said, well, look, it's going to take me half an hour to set this schedule. I said, that's okay. So I set it all up. And of course, the reason I'm using an Octoplus in the first place is because of Frank. Because Chester Thompson played a Octoplus on Roxy and Elsewhere.
And Elsewhere, yeah.
Right? So it's so funny. Anyway, so he hands me this chart. I go, great. I go, oh, fuck. And I open it out. It's a song that was named Darlene. And you know what? I still remember it now. I still remember it. And I thought, how am I going to read this thing? So I put up on a music stand and I just say to myself, well, just play all the meter changes. Get everything else, just play the meter changes. Because it was all groove anyway. And off we go. And Frank, I think, probably said he counted it in. Off we went. And it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like that's what it was like. And I was reading it like crazy. And, you know, I'm getting through it. And we got to these other bits, which I went, I have no idea what that is, which is, you know, all that kind of stuff. And anyway, we got to the end of the chart and Frank went, great, see you in the studio and, you know, Monday or whatever it is. I got a gig.
Wow.
It was interesting because there was kind of an unlikely bunch of musicians. When I'm looking at the music and I'm looking at the guys playing, I'm going, I wouldn't have booked, you know, because they're not that kind of player. But what was amazing was they were actually perfect. And I remember the guitarist, Phil Palmer. We had played, he eventually played with Dire Straits. Beautiful guitar player, but he's not a jazz player, and he's not, you know, doesn't have a lightning technique, but he has a beautiful sound. And Frank was wonderful working with him. And he came up with this most beautiful guitar part that I think because of his, maybe the technical limitations, that's how that came about, because he always thought very melodically. And it turned, we played this track for 2 days, recording it and listening and then going back out and listening, and until every musician had got it together. And for a drummer, it's probably the easiest part because we only have to hit things in time. You know, we don't have to actually play notes and, right. You know, and sure. So it was taking the other guys a bit longer to get around this track. And Frank was very aware of the fact that I got it down, but now I'm going to start, you know, losing interest. So he would come into the drum booth. Remember in those days we had drum booths. And he would give me something to do. He said, yeah, these bars here, I want you to play 2 beats on there, 2 beats on the kick drum. What? Huh? And I'm going, at that speed? He said, yeah. And then he'd leave the room. And I go, oh, fuck. So, it was hilarious. I mean, he even told me, even on one of the tracks, he told me to take your stick and just hit the sides of the shells between the 2 toms.
Perfect.
Basically, just trying to tie me up in knots while the other guys can catch up, you know. And then the next guy, you know, he'd do something with them until everybody was at that level where we were now playing the song like in our sleep. And that's the reason I can sing it now and still play it. Isn't that crazy?
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So it was a really interesting experience. We were hoping he would pick up his guitar as he had all his gear there and play. And the closest he got was to put the guitar on his, you know, put the guitar strap around his neck and then take it off. He wouldn't play a note. It was hilarious. He was a very interesting guy. But I remember one track we did. It wasn't Dead Girls of London. It was a kind of a faster track, and we finished the track. We take the headphones off, got up, and walked to the control room. And as I walked into the control room, he stood up and walked towards me and took out his hand and said, "Great track." That was, which I think was quite rare from Frank for him to say things like that. And I thought, wow, yeah, it was pretty cool. It was a very cool experience. Yeah.
Did he ever approach you about joining his band?
No, because he was talking about this young kid who sat really low and played amazingly, and I couldn't pronounce his name. I said, "Who's that?" And it was Vinny, of course.
Okay.
And it's funny because I had heard of Vinny when I was in LA with Stanley Clarke's band from the guitarist, and he was starting to play around town, and but it was quite hard for him to break into sessions at that time. And there was a new band called Pages, Richard Page,
Mr.
and
Mister.
but later became Mr. Mister. Yeah. And I think Vinny was playing with the band, but the producer, who I think used to play guitar with Don Ellis, produced Al Jarreau, good friend of Lukather's. I just can't remember his name right
Larry
now.
Carlton?
No. It was a real producer guy. Why can't I think of his name? It'll come. He wanted to have Gad or somebody like that on the record, or somebody he knew. He didn't know Vinny at that time. So I had heard of this guy, and then Frank told me about this guy, and he was raving about him. And then I wasn't going to join Frank's band. No.
All right, this next one's a little bit long. In 1980, you played drums on Jeff Beck's album There and Back, which I've always wished was titled There and Beck for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry for the recent loss of your friend. On that excellent album, you recorded a classic drum track, which I considered, or before today, learning from you, considered to be the third ever double bass drum shuffle, and the first ever in odd meter, as part of it is in 7. Was that initial groove for both this and the aforementioned instrumental track Hurricane by Gary Moore, originally inspired by Billy Cobham from his iconic song Quadrant 4 off his debut solo album Spectrum? I've always considered that to be the first ever recorded double bass shuffle. That said, I guess it's possible one was played before being recorded, and if so, my guess would be your mutual friend and mentor, the amazing Louie Bellson. Do you recall if Louie played one first? And if so, is there a recording of a double bass shuffle that predates Quadrant 4?
I'm definitely not aware of it. I never heard anything that was played like that. I think probably Carmine Appice probably would have played a shuffle like that, but I think the difference is are the little triplets.
The ghost notes, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what made it so distinctive. When I first heard Quadrant 4, I was like, what is he doing?
Me too.
Is he doing that all on the bass drum? Like, that's what I thought it was. And then I listened closer and I went, no, I think I know what he's doing. And then I just started messing around with it and learning how to play it. I had recorded various versions of that actually on different albums that probably weren't well known,
Sure.
So it wasn't, I played that rhythm quite a bit. But Hurricane was definitely before Space Boogie. Well, first of all, going back to Jeff, we also lost our bass player too this year, Mo Foster.
So sorry.
In the space of 6 months, 50% of the There and Back band was gone. So yeah, it was a bit of a real shock actually for both. Actually, I didn't speak to Jeff. I hadn't spoken to Jeff for years. I did get to speak to Mo before he got too sick to speak, and that was lovely. We had a lovely conversation. But Yeah, he went downhill really fast. And I just went to London in November to do his to play at his tribute concert, and met a lot of the guys I used to do sessions with in the 70s.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
It was really lovely. Yeah, it was very special. So the story about Space Boogie. So
yes, sir.
When I joined Jeff, I started working with him in 1978. The first thing I did with him was go into the studio with him and Jan Hammer to record the other songs that you hear on the record. And we also recorded some other songs that never made it to the record too. They'd never been released.
Wow.
It was well, I've got, there's Jeff and Jan Hammer, who I'm a huge fan of, always was. And that was an amazing experience. What was interesting was the management, and Jeff entrusted me to pick the studio and the engineer, because they wanted to do something different. They didn't really know what was kind of happening at that time. And I'm in the studios all the time. So I said, well, I think the best rock and roll studio around is Ramport. That was Pete Townshend's studio. And I think that the engineer I love working with is a guy called John Punter, who used to work at Air Studios, and he recorded Nazareth, Mr. Big, the English Mr. Big, and loads of artists. He recorded that first album I did with the band Chopin in 1974, right. And I always loved the sound he got. He was a drummer, as most engineers are, funnily enough, and I just loved the sound he got. So, and they said, right, we're going to follow your advice and we'll go there, and it was great. That's what we did. We recorded those songs, and then we then had to get them to get Stanley involved to do the Japanese tour, and then in 1979 it was back to recording. So Jeff invited me and Tony Hymas down to his house for just to play and jam and try some new tunes. So there were a couple of Jan Hammer tunes that we were jamming on, but I don't think Jeff was really digging them. And that's when I realized Jeff's not a writer. He doesn't write. I mean, he doesn't need to write, basically, but he does need somebody like a Max Middleton or a Jan Hammer to write music. And that's when I looked at Tony. And then after that, I phoned Tony. I said, Tony, we need to write material. And I think I know what Jeff needs. So we started writing material. We wrote the first song. He came around to my house. The first song we wrote was Golden Road. It's like more of a ballad, which Jeff plays on a sitar, electric sitar. The next song we wrote was El Becco. And we took the first song down to him to play, and he loved it. And then he started learning it, and of course, in true Jeff fashion, he would play that melody over and over again, figuring out the way that only he can play it, and the best way you can ever play it. It's just amazing, Then we were jamming. I only took a little kit down there, and I got bored. And he had a little Premier kit in the corner, so I dragged that over. So I had a double bass drum, and I put the hi-hat on. It was a bit of a stretch, Whoops, sorry. Oops, yeah. There we go. A little bit of Keith Moonism there. We started playing a boogie, like a shuffle. So I started playing in 7 across the 4, just for fun, turning it around. And I just figured out how to play that boogie in 7, which is quite easy. I mean, you just keep the bass drums going, just change your hands, Yeah. And Jeff heard that it was in 7, so he started playing rhythm in 7, and Tony was doing something else. And I looked at Tony and said, that's our next tune. And then I got together with Tony. Sadly, that's the one tune I can't find the demo of. I have the demo of The Pump. I maybe I have the demo. They say I lost a lot of stuff in the fire, and so.
Yeah.
But anyway, we came up with Space Boogie and took it down to Jeff, played it to him, and he loved it. So that's the story of how that came about.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I have one more double bass shuffle question for you before continuing with something about you, Cobham and Bellson. I'd like to talk about another session you played for with a guitar god, Trevor Rabin, before he joined Yes. In 1981, a year after the Jeff Beck sessions, you played on Rabin's third solo album, which was called Wolf.
Yep.
The song Looking for a Lady, Wolfman, begins with a minute-long thunderous instrumental section with you playing a blazing double bass shuffle. This intro has nothing to do with the rest of the song. The title has Wolfman in parentheses after a dash. Did Trevor specifically ask you to play a double bass shuffle somewhere on this album because of your incredible work on Beck's Space Boogie?
I don't remember.
Fair.
Fair. I don't have many. I don't have much recollection of those sessions. Funnily enough, apart from Trevor, absolutely lovely guy, very funny. And I remember sitting in the control room with him. We were just laughing because he was just, he's a very funny man. And I think we were at the Kink studio, Conk. I seem to remember that. Does Jack Bruce play on this record?
Yes,
he does, doesn't he? Yes, I remember that. Because I remember him in the studio, but I can't remember the music at all. It's
sure.
Funny.
Fair.
Yeah, so that I don't know. I have no idea where that came from. But it's probably something that happened in the studio, and he just decided to keep it.
Yeah, it sounds great. So revisiting your time with fellow double bass trailblazers, your friends Billy Cobham and Louie Bellson, in the late 80s, you were part of Pete York's super drumming video sessions. And as a young teen in New York, I used to walk to my local Blockbuster Video and rent the VHS to watch the three of you over and over and over. In fact, your playing in that band really tuned my ears into what it would be like to play with such an incredible bassist like Wolfgang Schmid. Can you speak on any memories you may have from that special film, and if you ever worked in a rhythm section with Wolfgang again after that?
Okay. 1987, beginning of the year, I had just been to Barbados to record with Jagger on Primitive Cool, and I flew back from Barbados to London, and I think stayed the night in London, and then flew on a connecting flight to Munich. And then somebody picked me up and drove to that church where we filmed all of this. Now, Louie had been working that day on his part, and I don't really remember how it happened, but someone maybe mentioned that we should play together. It hadn't been planned. It wasn't a planned thing. And I was very eager to do that. I thought, that would be fantastic. So we decided the next day Louie was going to be there. The next day we would start by doing that what you see on the video. And I'd met Louie a few times before, and he's always a lovely man. In fact, actually, this is it's a bit long, but in my dad's band, there was a trumpet player that would play occasionally, and he was my favorite trumpet player. And his name was Bobby Harrison. And Bobby was used to play at the Talk of the Town in London. And he was doing a residency there with Pearl Bailey. And Louie Bellson was playing drums. And so he called me, he said, would you like to come to one of the shows and see Louie? And I said, yeah. So he picked me up. We drove into London, and we went into the Talk of the Town, and we went onto the stage, and there was Louie tuning his drums. So Bobby introduces me to Louie, and I go, like this. And how old was I? I would have been probably 15, I think. And, Louie being Louie, the first thing he said was, wait a second. And Bobby explained that I was the drummer in the band that he played in. right? So he obviously, oh, okay, he called one of the stagehands, says, could you bring a chair, please? And they brought a chair over, and he plonked it down right beside his hi-hat. So I spent the whole concert like this,
Wow.
with his hi-hat going like that, and the trumpet section there, 4 trumpets, and having the same view of Pearl Bailey's bottom that Louie did. It was hilarious. And I got to watch for the first time, actually, no, not for the first one, because I used to go and watch my father's drummers play when he was recording. And I used to sit pretty much in the same place. But this is the first time I saw a drummer like Louie up close. And it's very different when you look from behind and when you look from the front. Because from the front, you can't really understand it. But from behind, it's like, oh, you can understand it. And it's very interesting. It's like, oh, wow, okay. So that was quite a few years back. I don't know, I didn't remember that. But fast forward to 1987, and suddenly we're playing together. And boy,
Incredible.
what an experience that was. I'll never forget, there's one bit, I think, in that when we're trading solos, I try to play a single stroke roll, and then he takes over, and of course it's
Yep.
and I'm going he's like that. So I thought, right, I'll try it on bass drum. So I go like this. But we had a great time, and he was such a lovely man, absolutely amazing, great experience. And
That's lovely.
the bass player, Hafner, right?
Wolfgang Schmidt.
Sorry, not Wolfgang Schmidt. Yeah, I'm thinking of Wolfgang Hafner. Wolfgang Schmidt. Yes. No, I don't think we ever did anything after that. I mean, I met him a few times. He came to see Protocol in Munich once, but
terrific.
I don't think we did. We may have done a session or two in Germany, but again, I don't remember. But
Sure.
But yeah, it was a great player, and Brian Auger was playing keyboards. So it was, it's a great band.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Yeah, that's childhood for me right there. This video. In 1985, you played on your third Pete Townsend solo record. White City, a Novel contained Face to Face, and of course the brilliant Give Blood, with the great grooves and energetic double bass ending. I still have the cassette tape, and that was my favorite song for ages when I was growing up. Did you realize how special the drum part was to that song as you were recording that album, and think it would have the everlasting power it's had?
Well, first of all, the first time I played with Pete was in 1979 on Empty Glass.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first album I did with him.
Right. And this was your third of his.
Yes, I think. There was Chinese Eyes in between, like 1982 or 83, something like that, and then White City. Again, that is a session that should never have happened.
Oh wow!
It was a total accident. Pete called himself to book me for that session, and I got the date and the time, and fine, great, see you then. And my drum tech at the time, Ravi, he went down there early in the day. I was on my way from where I used to live, which is quite a long way. I moved out of London and I was living in the countryside. And so my drum cases started to arrive at Eel Pie Studios, and Chris Thomas is there. He's going, why are Simon's drums arriving? And by the way, I didn't know this until a year later. I had no knowledge of this at all, but So he goes to Pete. He said, Pete, Simon's drums are arriving. Why? He's not supposed to be here till next week. And Pete goes, oh, shit, I think I booked him on the wrong day. And I think they had a word with Ravi, my drum tech. So is Simon on his way? He said, oh, yeah, he's driving down from Suffolk. But yeah, he'd probably be on his way now. Pete, what are we going to do? He said, I'll figure it out. So now, I didn't know about any of that. I arrive, and I'm thinking it's just a normal session. So Ravi set up my drum, we're miking it all up. Bill Price is the engineer, and we do a sound check, and that's it. And then I go into the control room and get some coffee, and Pete has kind of disappeared. And I thought, this is strange. Now, there's this guy. I wasn't introduced to him, and he's got a Fender Strat on him, and he's just direct inject into the board, the SSL, and Bill Price has got a sound on him, and he's got a delay happening, but it's just very quiet. He's just noodling, but he's talking to Bill Price, and Bill's talking about, so you guys, you're going out on tour? He said, yeah, we're probably going to go out, blah, 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 like that, So I thought, well, this must be some old session guy, friend of Pete's, and he's got a local band, and he's going out to play or something like that. Anyway, Pete comes back, and he has a song called Give Blood. So we listen to the demo, because Pete makes great demos, and I go, okay, great. And we go out, we start playing. There's no bass player. And I'm like, why is there no bass player? And then no keyboard player either, but Rabin turns up a bit later. And so Pete's playing acoustic guitar in a booth. The guitar player is on my left playing his rig with this delay. And Rabin is playing keyboards ahead of me, and I'm playing the drum kit. So we start playing, and we do a couple of run-throughs, and we go and listen, and Chris Thomas wants to try a couple of different things, and I'll bypass that bit. But anyway, we go out again to do another take, and I asked, because we weren't playing to a click, but it was very important to play to the delay of the guitar, right? I said, could you turn the guitar up in my cans a little bit louder? And then said, yeah, could you actually turn the drummer up a little bit? And we get the track, which is a great track. I mean, it played itself. The tempo was exactly right. Everything was right about it, So anyway, we finished the session, and I get in my car and I drive home, and my then wife, she says, so how did the session go? I said, well, it went well, but it was kind of really strange. And I explained what went on. I said, yeah, and there was this older guy playing guitar, a friend of Pete's, I guess. He was quite good, actually. She says, what did he look like? Well, he had short hair and kind of a roundish face. And she said, Dave Gilmour. I went, no, Dave's got long hair. I said, yeah, like 10 years ago. I went, oh, fuck. Are you kidding me? Anyway, the next day I drive down and get out of my car. And I'm driving at that time, it was doing fairly well. I was driving a 928 Porsche, right? Across the other side of the street is a brand new 928S. And I'm looking at this car and I'm going, oh boy, I think I know whose that is. So I go in the studio, and then there was this other guy that was there who had left, but obviously his tech, right? There's a blue Anvil case, little attaché case with Pink Floyd written on the side of it. And I go, oh no. So I go in, I thought, wow, we were never introduced, because this is kind of typical in Britain anyway. It's not as, in America, everybody says hello to each other. In Britain, we don't. It's just a different thing, And I go into the kind of the games room, there's a pool table in there, and get some coffee, and I see Dave in there. So I thought, how am I going to do this? So I go, oh, hi, good morning. I said, is that your 928S outside? He said, yeah. And I said, how's the sound system in it? He said, great. You want to have a listen? Sure. So he takes me outside. We get in the car, and he plays a Jeff Beck track. And I can't remember if it's a track that I played on or not. I actually don't remember that. And I'm listening, and I'm going, yeah, I either said, well, yeah, I played on this track, or I work with Jeff. And he said, yeah, I know. And I went, oh, shit. Anyway, from that point, we became best buddies. He was absolutely wonderful to work with, and we carried on with Pete doing other things, which was great. But boy, that was embarrassing. I had no idea. And
that's fabulous.
Because of the Pete was so, he said, I've got to find some music. What are we going to play? We got nothing to play. We were supposed to write. I think that's what they were doing. They were going to do some writing that day. I think that's what was the plan was, or record something else. I don't know. So Pete's running backwards and forwards from his house, trying to find cassettes and DATs and stuff. So we got some music to play. And I think he just totally forgot to introduce us, or maybe he just thought, I'd be smart enough to know that's Dave Gilmour, but I wasn't, It was hilarious, absolutely hilarious. But yeah, so we got on really well and had a great time. And it's
that's terrific.
Yeah, it is. I know it's a track that just kind of I got into a bit of an argument with the producer because he wanted me to play a certain thing, and I said, how would I play that with a track like this? What are you thinking? And of course Pete loves it. Pete loves a little bit of stuff coming together in the control room. He loves that. And he's going, this is great. So I went out and I was a little bit miffed because I played the one take of it playing something really inane. And then Chris said, oh, fuck it, play anything you want. And then we came up with that track because I was kind of like,
perfect.
Right,
That's perfect. Speaking of Pete, can you talk a bit about your time with The Who? Just the scale and scope of being in that massive band must have been life-altering in some ways.
Yeah, it was. The largest gigs I'd ever played prior to that were, if I remember correctly, were with Jagger. We played at the Dome in Tokyo, which is like 60-something thousand people,
Wow.
So I had my first taste of hitting a snare drum in a sound check and hearing it repeat 3 or 4 times, like this, with delay towers and stuff like that. But then to go on the road with The Who, we rehearsed for about 2 months. We rehearsed nearly 100 songs. It was ridiculous, the amount of songs we learned. Plus, after rehearsal, I would then drive to the studio, Pete's studio, to redo all the tape songs because they were worn out. They were so hissy and old. So I redid all those songs like Barbara O'Reilly, Won't Get Fooled Again, Join Together.
My Generation.
You bet. All those, the ones that we used to play with tape. And
Sure.
redid it using Dolby SR, half-inch 4-track tapes. I got to use his Synclavier and all his tape machines. I got to hear all the demos, which was amazing. So it was, it was pretty stunning. The whole tour was pretty stunning. Private Plane. We never did more than 2 shows in a row. It was a really amazing tour. Probably one of the best tours I've ever done. Boy, did I get fit playing that music every night.
It was a real treat to see that. It was broadcast on CBS or some station here in the States, and they showed the whole Tommy show. That was when they were doing one of the anniversaries of it and playing the whole thing. I was curious, What were your favorite parts of Tommy to play? I suppose
Pinball Wizard. Pinball Wizard was,
I love it.
I think that was my favorite. Just the groove. The groove was perfect for me. Oh gosh, it's hard to remember.
I think the big musical moment in that album is probably "Amazing Journey" and "Sparks." That's quite the rave up there. I loved what you played on that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was fun. It was really amazing. We didn't know the set list until just before the show. Pete, Roger, and John never spoke to each other unless it was just before the show. And the fascinating thing were the stories about Keith Moon were told by three different people in three different ways. They remembered the stories in three different ways. It was hilarious. So that explains again a little bit about the memory, how it works, and perspective too. You know.
While we're on the subject of the Who, I wanted to talk a minute about the one-off supergroup that you were in with John Entwistle, the Best, which is a group a lot of people I don't think are even aware of. But
No.
I've seen the footage of it, and it's really fascinating. I mean, it's like you brought together Jeff Skunk Baxter from Steely Dan, Keith Emerson, John Entwistle, Joe Walsh, and you're playing music that all of them did. And it was really interesting to see John Entwistle playing Carnival Number 9 and Bodhisattva. And, it's interesting to see these guys play out of context. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about how that group came together and why it dissolved so quickly.
It actually started in the China Club in Los Angeles. So right after the Who tour in 1989, John Entwistle, he married his then girlfriend, Maxine, who was from LA, and moved to LA. So he bought a house just off Sunset and moved. So I guess when he was he was a good friend of Joe Walsh's anyway. They just decided to put together a jam band to play at the China Club every Monday night or whatever night it was. I wasn't there, so I don't know. I don't remember any of this. But I was just told this. And then Skunk, I think, might have put it together. He's quite good at arranging people, being the catalyst. And so they used to jam. And I think there were some Japanese people there. Japanese promoter was visiting LA and saw the band. I thought, we should bring this to Japan and do some concerts. And then that was the first I heard of it. I got a call from John asking if I'd be interested in playing with him and Joe Walsh and Keith Emerson and Skunk Baxter. I said, sure, I would. So that's how that started. So I drove down to John's house and met Keith there. I'd already played with Keith in a band prior to that with Jack Bruce, actually, which never came to anything. 1983, yeah. So we jammed for a little bit, learned some songs, and then I thought, well, what can we do of my material? So I thought The Pump would be the best tune to do. So I invited Keith down to my house, or up to my house. He drove up from where he lives up to where I lived. And we had a great time, showed him the chords and everything. And he started, doing a few of his own voicings, very Emerson-like. And that was great, absolutely great. So then we moved to Los Angeles to rehearse. And that's the first time I really get to work with Joe. I'd met Joe a couple of times, but that was the first time I ever played with him. And we started playing The Pump, which is, very different musically for everybody to play. And Joe decided, because he knew, Jeff played the original, so he decided to do it with Bottleneck.
Oh, nice.
It was really cool, really cool.
He's a great slide player.
Oh, beautiful. Absolutely. So now it's interesting because I quite recently, actually, you know how YouTube is. And you select YouTube on your Apple TV, and then all of these new things come up. And you go, how did they come up? And I think one was like The Best. And I went, how did that come up? Oh, wow, I'd never seen this. Or, one of those. And one is like the full show. It was one of the shows we did at Yokohama. Now, I scanned through it because I wanted to see The Pump, and I couldn't find it. So what I don't remember is, I know we played it, but did we drop it from the set list on that night, or was it edited out? I just don't know. I really don't know what happened to it. Which is a bit of a shame, because I would like to have seen. I would have liked to have heard it, heard how it sounded, But we had a really great time coming up with an arrangement for Boris the Spider, which used a bit of the planets and Holst, Mars rather.
Yeah.
And that was really fun, that arrangement. Actually, it was really cool. We had a blast. We really did. Sadly, we only played 3 shows. I think we only played 2 shows in Japan. We were supposed to play a show in Osaka, but it was supposed to be an outdoor gig, which in October. No, I don't think so. And there was a typhoon, so they had to cancel that gig. So we ended up doing a club date, just like we just turned up in the club and sat in with the band and started playing. It was one of those. And then we went to Hawaii. We went to play the Blaisdell Arena in Honolulu, and that was the last thing we ever did. It was just one of those weird things,
Yeah, I suggest our viewers seek it out on YouTube because it's very unique. I don't think you would ever expect such a lineup to come together, and it was really awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. It was great.
That's terrific. Toto is another massive band in your remarkable resume and unbelievable career. Can you speak a little bit on what it was like to replace the fallen icon, Jeff Porcaro?
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario following somebody's footsteps in a band. But the Toto situation, in a way, was very different because we're talking about a band that's always been together since they were at school. They were a school band, garage band together, way before they did sessions. And they grew up together. And now somebody very close to them has left, has departed. So I guess there was a much more of an emotional scenario and very difficult for the guys. So what am I supposed to do? Well, my job is to play the songs, and do a good job and be a professional. So that's really all I could do. You can't. They picked me because of the way I play. I have a very particular style. I can't really copy anybody else because I just do it really badly. And they also didn't want somebody to come in and copy Jeff.
Sure.
They wanted to have someone to bring something else to the band so it hopefully wouldn't be compared. I mean, you're always going to get comparisons. It's just the way, that's human nature, So that's when I started playing. Now, I only thought it was going to be for the length of that tour, 42 shows, and that was it. I didn't know what the band would probably break up after that. But the weird thing about it was I was already on my way to leaving England and coming to the States to live. I'd already got my work permit. I'd already incorporated a company in the States, so I could actually work here and all that kind of stuff. And my question was, well, when am I actually going to get on a plane and leave England? I hadn't really made that decision yet, but I thought probably do it at the end of the summer, maybe October, because the weather starts getting really bad in England. That would be a really good time to move to Los Angeles. But then, of course, I suddenly got a call from Steve asking me if I would consider playing the tour with them. And that's how it started. I couldn't make it until I still had a lot of commitments, which I had to get out of. And the last record I recorded in England before I left was with Big Country, Buffalo Skinners. Yeah. And right after that record, I left. And I was arrived in LA. We went to dinner. I met Mike and David Page, and Luke was the guy kind of holding it all together. And then we started rehearsing. First song, they said, well, what do you want to play? And I said, let's play Hydra. And they went, oh, right. Okay. We haven't played that in a long time. It's not the easiest tune. I went, yeah, but I really like it. I said, okay, let's do that. So we played Hydra. That was the first thing. We got to the last note and it all went quiet. And Luke looked at Mike and he looked at Paige. He said, I think this is going to work. And then we started, we finished rehearsals, 3 weeks of rehearsals, and then off we went to Europe and start the tour.
Oh, that's wonderful. Soon after joining Toto, a few of the members recorded the first Los Lobotomies album, on which you're affectionately listed as Mr. Cannons.
Yeah.
How did that all come about? And do you have any fond memories from that great recording? Did you get to work in the studio with any of the guest artists who were part of those sessions?
Right. So this would be the first record I recorded in LA after moving here. I'd done a few sessions before. And we recorded at Capitol, Studio A. Tom Fletcher was the engineer. Luke and I wrote our first tune together, Party in Simon's Pants, which we did in like 2 hours. He just came in, then left. You know, it was done. It was amazing. And we recorded that album. I think during the recording it was just the band. Paige came in to play one track, I think. Lenny Castro came in to play some percussion, but that was it. Okay. I think any of the guests came in afterwards during overdubs. Yeah, that was it, really.
Yeah, wonderful. I believe Hiromi approached you about her trio project. How did that whole gig come about? And have you ever been on stage with another musician who was such an effervescent performer? What's it like locking in with Anthony Jackson? Did you guys ever talk about meshing as a rhythm section, or do you both just do you and it works? Couple more. Yeah. Is all of the music learned by ear, or are there some charts? And finally, was it your call to have Steve Smith as your main sub for this tremendous trio?
Wow. Okay. So, well, first of all, Auntie and I had played together back in 1982 with Al Di Meola. So wow. we had already met and played, and so we knew each other. Also, Anthony played in my band. He played in one of the first lineups of Protocol.
Oh, wow.
In 1990, I think it was. Wow. And then we played again in 92. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. This is really hard to remember. It was 90. I think it was 90 and then 92. He came over twice, and we recorded a live album called Force Majeure.
Right.
So when I got a call from Hiromi's manager, she introduced herself. She said, "I manage Hiromi. Do you know who Hiromi is?" And just so happened, I'd been watching. Somebody sent me a link to a YouTube thing, and I went, "Yeah, I'd just been watching her on YouTube actually." And she said, "Well, she would like you to play on her next album with Anthony Jackson." And I went, "Oh, wow, well, I know Anthony. We go way back." And I said, but Laura, does Hiromi know what I do? I mean, you know, and she said, "Oh, yes, she's very aware of your setup and the way you play. And in fact, you played in Japan with Toto at the Jazz Festival, and she was there. That's where she first met me." I was like, "Oh, okay, I don't remember that, but yeah, okay." So that's how that started, and we started recording. She sent demos, and she sent PDFs, you know, of handwritten charts, and that was the first time I got the insight as to how difficult this music was going to be. So I started making like a smaller. Oh no, I don't think I did that then. I think I just had the charts, and we had a little rehearsal in New York. And all went well, and then we started recording voice. And I was still with Toto at the time. They had started booking shows, and unfortunately, I couldn't make the first few shows because I was still on a tour with Toto. So Hiromi approached Steve, and then I got a call. I'll never forget this. I was just coming out of a hairdresser, just had a haircut, and the phone goes, and it's Steve. I go, "Hey, Steve, how you doing?" He said, "Fine." He said, "Look, I got a call from Hiromi to play with her." I went, "Oh, yeah." And he said, "I've been listening to the music." And I went, "Mm-hmm." He said, "It's really difficult, isn't it?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "No, I mean, it's really difficult." I said, "Yeah, it is."
Oh, that's fabulous.
I know. So we had a little chat about it, and I said, "Well, you know, have fun. And, so they went out and did the first few shows of the trio project, and then I became available, and then we started, playing as the trio. And I have to say those what was about when did we start? 2010. Those 6 years, 2010 to 2016, were probably some of the best musical experiences of my whole career. We had
that's wonderful.
So much fun, and it was really great because I was in such a learning position. To I'd never played without a guitar, and since my dad's band, you know what I mean?
Wow.
And any
sure.
straight ahead stuff that I was doing, and it was very strange. We were two percussion instruments and one monophonic musical instrument, which is the bass.
Sure.
It was. The drum kit just sounded too loud to me all the time because there was no level on stage soaking up that transience. So I really had to learn how to play with an acoustic piano, but playing that intense music, that's really difficult. With the dynamics and playing really quietly but very difficult passages. I mean, I'd never really done that before. So it was a real learning curve. It really was. But we had so much fun, and I love Hiromi. She's just such a go-getter. There's nothing is impossible. Let's play this. I said, but we don't know the song. I said, yes, we'll play it anyway. We just played it once, so I had a chart stuck to my cymbal stands, and how does this one go? I can't remember. Oh yeah, it was she's amazing, fearless, absolutely fearless. And because of that, I learned an awful lot from her.
Oh, that's tremendous. I want to start focusing on not only your career as a solo artist, but also get into some drum-specific stuff and gear. Now, my memory is a little clouded here. I remember when your debut disc came out, Protocol. I was so excited to see you perform a drum clinic and promote that release at the main Sam Ash on Long Island in New York. It was at the original location on President Street in Hempstead, where I got most of my original drum gear as a kid, including your Simon Phillips ProMark 707 drumsticks. Do you recall if that was like a full clinic tour backed by Tama? And then again, this was so long ago, it's possible this was even pre-Protocol. I do have one of your promo glossy photos from that clinic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, was that the 1988 clinic?
I was going to say this is either 1987 or 1988. So yes, let's go. It must have been 1988.
It would have been 88.
Yes.
So, right, I started doing clinics in the States with Tama in 1982. And we did a whole bunch. 82, I did 2 runs in 83 with Bobby Cochran and Alex Blake, because they were Ibanez players. 84, we did the NAMM show in Chicago. I think I did a tour. Yeah, I did a clinic tour in 85, because I remember I had just started motor racing, and I did my first run in a Formula car that weekend just before I left to come to the States. That was 85. 86, don't think I did a clinic tour in 86. I don't think I did a clinic tour in 87. So 88 would have been the next one. And I was
that makes perfect sense.
Huh?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I'm just remembering my mom took me.
It was right after I'd recorded Protocol. So yes, that was the first time Protocol was on sale, and the whole reason for that kind of mini CD, as it were, was there were a bunch of demos. I recorded a bunch of demos, and I was shopping around various record companies to get a record deal, but they didn't know what to do with that kind of music. So I thought it was a bit strange because Surfing with the Alien had just come out, Joe Satriani. But they were very guitar orientated, and the music was simpler. It was more rock and roll. Mine was a little more involved, a little more jazzy. So I was just getting fed up with it, and I had by then I put my studio in my house in 1986. So it was a residential studio, and I was doing a lot of production. So I thought, I've got the studio. I might as well record it on my own. So hence why I played everything on it, because I didn't particularly have a budget for it. So it was all my demo sounds, you know, the playing a keyboard a la Jan Hammer. It was a DX7 or a DX9 actually, going out through a Tom Schultz Rockman into a guitar cab, miking it up. That was my guitar sound, and various other synthesizers and bass, of course, you know, synth bass. And that's it. And I decided to put it out and manufacture the CD and sell it. I had 1,000 copies printed out, and that was it. That was the start of Protocol.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I remember the clinic. And continuing with gear before we get to some of the solo albums and bands of yours, I'm just going to guess that you're the longest tenured endorser for both Tama drums and ProMark drumsticks?
Not quite.
Oh, okay.
Not quite. Stuart Copeland. Well,
Makes
actually,
sense.
now that's interesting, because Stuart was, I just found out recently, was not actually an endorser until a few years later. But he bought the Tama kit in, I think, 75 or 76.
Okay.
But he wasn't actually an endorser. Lenny White was before me. Billy was before me. But there again, they left Tama.
Right. That's what I'm saying, of staying all the way through.
Yeah, Elvin Jones. There may be a couple of other drummers that are still with Tama, but I'm certainly one of the longest.
Sure.
And that was end of 78, let's say 1979, beginning of 79. I started really officially playing Tama, and here we are in 2024.
Yeah. I finally got my Tamas based on you for in 1991.
Right.
At that same Sam Ash, they had moved, but I believe you're currently playing the Tama Star Series drums, and perhaps even with the walnut shells. And I designed my DW Collector Series kit based off of that. I love the walnut shells because you can get an even tensioning and tuning with the drums singing high, medium, and low. They never get boxy. Do you have a preference of wood or shell type nowadays? And also, how about counter hoops? I'm a big fan of die-cast.
Right. Well, okay. So my main drum kit is actually a maple star kit.
Okay.
They're the ones I have. I have one in Japan, I have one in Europe, and I have one in Los Angeles. That is my favorite drum kit. The other drum kits that I have are the signature kit, which was a couple of years before the Monarch kit, which is maple and bubinga. But you're right, I do have a walnut kit. I was just interested in how it would sound, and that's actually the kit I have here at this studio.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
It's an interesting kit. It doesn't have the sustain of the maple.
Sure.
I've found that the tom-toms sound better when they're tuned lower. They don't really work tuned up for some reason. Okay. It's just weird. There's a lot of interaction with the other drums. They don't seem to be very comfortable. They don't seem to record as well. The interesting thing about the drum kit, and this particular drum kit has 22-inch bass drums. I just wanted something different. I miss the lovely warm bigness of the 24s and the maple. But funnily enough, for heavy metal, these 22s seem to work better.
Oh, wow.
They're brighter. They have more smack. That's really what it is.
Okay.
And the toms, like I say, I do use the same shells when I play in straight ahead, like in a bebop scenario, and I just tune them all up. But I'm using an 18-inch bass drum with that, and I'm using very different cymbals, Constantinople Zildjian cymbals, and I use usually use an old Leedy 1939 snare drum with that setup. Wow. With stick choppers, yeah. So but that's because it's we're playing much quieter, playing a different style of music, and that works really nicely. But yeah, that's the one that I use here for a lot of my recordings these days, because I'm doing most of them here now. But I would say the Star Maple is my real. That's my main kit. Yeah.
Excellent. And speaking of gear, the drummer in Sean's band wanted me to ask you about the tensioning and tuning of your drums. He was wondering if you ever use any type of external dampening, such as moon gel or studio rings, or if you just always have it wide open.
Always one.
That's what we thought.
Yeah.
Why is that your preference? To have it wide open?
Because they sound better.
Just it's down to sound.
Very simple. Well,
Simple.
the thing is, first of all, they're louder because you're not impacting the vibration of the drum by putting something on the head. And if they're louder, you have a wider dynamic range. And if you hit them softly, they ring. If you put some dampening on the head and hit it softly, it doesn't ring. Okay. It just kind of groans. So, and I do tune my toms higher than most people. People, when they hear the drum kit recorded or in the PA, it sounds big. But when they actually get behind the kit and they go, wow, it's much higher than I imagined, because that's just something that happens when you put a microphone on a drum. It just sounds different,
Sure.
Now, sometimes, depending in the room that you're in, you might get one tom-tom that booms a little bit more than the others. And the other thing is the kit here doesn't have mounted 15 and 16 toms. They're floor toms. So the first floor tom which is really near the bass drum and enclosed by two other tom-toms. I've got a 15, 16, and an 18. That drum is the most problematic of the whole kit because it booms. And I think it's because it's so enclosed. So sometimes what I do is damp the bottom head of that drum, not the top head, because I want the ring to be heard. But I want the boom, if it gets too much, I want to just reduce that. So I'll just stick a little bit of like this rubberized material that you use for tool drawers in a tool chest. I'll just cut a little bit of that out and gaffer it to that bottom head, just to take a little bit of that boom out, and then the toms are kind of more even.
Oh, terrific. And I've long wondered about your cymbal placement. Do you set most of them up rather high so there won't be any mic bleeding to get a great mix? And also, have you ever had any shoulder issues because of that?
I probably set them up like that because Buddy Rich had them, flat like that, and Billy Cobham had them flat and high. That's where it started. But I also, when I was doing a lot of sessions, it just made more sense to me to give the engineer more room to put a microphone. Because if you're using, especially in those days, an MD421 Sennheiser, which is about that long, and then you've got an XLR, and then you've got a bit of cable before it turns, that's, you've got 14 inches, 12 to 14 inches above a tom-tom. And if you've got a cymbal coming down and hitting the top of the cables, that's not going to work. And generally, you don't want to have the capsule facing across the drum. It actually sounds quite good like that, but the problem is you're going to get a lot of bleed from everything else. So I tend to have my capsules down, but I have quite a big distance from the microphone to the drum. But also, I'm so used to having so many drums anyway. Leakage is your friend. Everybody thinks of a drum kit as a Linn drum machine. No, it's not. It's a grand piano. That's how I look at it. And if I put one microphone over the drum kit, it should sound great and it should sound balanced. And the cymbals shouldn't be too loud. I think one of my biggest, pet peeves are drummers that pick these heavy cymbals that are drowning out these small drums that they use. It doesn't make sense to me. So yes, the cymbals went up to give enough room to get microphones, and help a little bit with the spill. You don't get too much cymbal into the mic, it just became a thing I got used to. If I have them too low, I hit them. Tom-toms,
Sure, sure.
Shoulder, no, I've never had any problems with physically at all.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I have bad shoulders, so it's something that I just think of when I see that. But you just alluded to having some different sizes for some different situations, but I'm still pretty positive for the most part you use a huge kit for all situations. I think it's so cool to me that you're always able to express yourself with all of the sound sources you hear in your inner ear at any time in any musical situation. But without naming names, have you ever had any kickback from, say, band leaders, bandmates, producers, engineers, roadies, etc., for the large setup?
Okay, so I started using a large setup in 1975, and not for all sessions. I had well, actually three kits, because there were two single kits, and then the big kit. So certain sessions I knew is a 3-hour session. Go in, play the songs, get out. I would use a small kit for. But once I started doing rock records, rock and roll sessions where I'd be in a studio for 3 or 4 days, I'd bring the big kit. Now, in those days, most of the engineers were really up for it, because studios had lots of microphones, lots of mic stands, and lots of cables. And as long as they had enough input channels, which by then they did, I think most consoles from 74 onwards were at least 32 channel. It would be a very small studio if they only had a 24 channel desk. And of course, 1978 when SSL, I think that's when they came out. Most of those consoles were 48 channel, and of course, at the Townhouse, I think they got 64 channel ones. I mean, the console started to become a lot larger with automated mix, because we needed to parallel different channels up so we could change certain things of the same signal, but have it coming up through a different fader with different EQ and different pan position. That's kind of how you did it. So the reason to have a lot of inputs, unless of course you were recording orchestras, big sessions, film dates, were more for mixing. You needed the extra channels when you were in mixdown, But I remember most of the engineers in the 70s were like, yeah, come on, let's go, And most of them I knew anyway. So, and it got around, and the other drummers would laugh, And they go, well, you can't miss, can you? You just wave your arms about, you're bound to hit something, It was great. It was, the older drummers, the older session guys, I mean, they knew me. They all were really, they were very encouraging. I never had a sense of like weirdness from them or jealousy or anything like that. They were always just, I think they were just really, nobody done that before, as far as I know. Taking in how many drums does an Octopus have? 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Nobody goes in with a 12-piece drum kit, unless you're in a big band, and still then it probably wouldn't be that many, Now, coming into the 80s, when drummers were starting to be phased out in favor of the Linn drum machine or the Fairlight CMI, and other various drum machines, the Akai, then it was kind of interesting turning up with a big drum kit, because a lot of these microphones weren't working because they didn't have to use as many microphones. A lot of the cables had disappeared, a lot of the mic stands. And I remember doing a session at Island Studios for Rodney Franklin with producer Paul Buckmaster. And this was a studio that I'd worked in 1974, one of my first rock and roll albums. And that's the studio where Free recorded It's All Right Now.
Oh, wow.
And it hadn't changed that much, except the control room had changed a lot, because the Helios had gone, the Altex had gone, and the 3Ms had gone. I think it was a big SSL in there now with JBL or Questids or probably Studer machines by then. And they were frantically running around all the other studios trying to find microphones, cables, and mic stands. They hadn't recorded a large kit for years. And this was 80... I want to say 84, 85. Isn't that amazing? So yeah. Now coming to the States, it's interesting. Recording in LA, that's interesting, because sometimes, it's like I remember first working with Bob Clearmountain. But that was in England. That was at Air Studios. Jimmy Iovine and Bob Clearmountain. And I had my usual kit, which is the kit everybody knows. And Bob came out and went, do you need all this? I said, well, yeah, that's my kit. And I said, you've mixed this kit, actually. He mixed a record that I did with a guy called Russ Ballard, Voices, in 1983. And he said, I did? He said, yeah, you mixed the same kit. But you see, in those days, you wouldn't know how large the drum kit was, because on a piece of 2-inch tape, 24 tracks, 23 available, you pretty much recorded the drum kit down to 8 tracks or 10 tracks if you had ambience, maybe 12. That was very extravagant. So all the tom-toms, you would bus to 2 tracks. It would be just a stereo pair for the toms, because it was a waste of a track of analog tape, So you never really knew exactly the setup of the drum kit, especially if you put both bass drums onto one track, which I used to always ask the engineer to do that, because I've had the second bass drum erased before because it only played one fill in a whole song, and they needed a tambourine track. And they're looking at the views, because the track, I don't know why they didn't put it down on the track sheet, and anyway, that's not being used. And of course, the moment they look away, it goes, there's that view that moves, right? So you can't see my finger. Like that. And of course, they erase it. And I remember hearing one album, I went, what happened to my other bass drum? They must have erased it. So I used to ask them, please route both bass drums to one track. And I would explain the situation. She said, okay, we can do that. I said, if you balance it properly and match it up, it should be fine. He said, yeah, actually, it's kind of easier anyway, because we're going to put them down the center anyway, because with vinyl, you don't really want anything with low end on the outside tracks, on the outside of the stereo image, because the stylus doesn't like it.
Right.
You want all your lower frequencies towards the middle, because all on a vinyl, low frequency anyway is mono. Anything below 80 or 100 hertz is basic mono. So for cutting vinyl, you really have to make sure that all your low end is in the center, so the cutting doesn't go through the vinyl, go through the acetate when it's cutting. So that's fine to have 2 kick drums on one track, just straight up the center, no problem. Anyway, he says Bob Clearmountain wanted to mic every tom-tom with 2 mics, top and bottom. Yeah.
Wow.
I never do that. I don't know. I mean, he's an amazing engineer. I mean, and I love working with him, but I just don't think it's necessary in the big picture. I don't think it does that much personally, but that's just me, So we had to come up with an agreement. Okay, I'll lose the 10. I'll lose the 18 or something like that. And he said, okay, we'll do that. So of course they had to get all these microphones and all these mic stands and cables at Air Studios and find channels to put them in. That's a lot of channels, So, but I think people know me. They know my drum kit. It's now, it's so long now that nobody questions. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Most of the recordings I do, I'm engineering anyway now. It's very rare.
Right. Yeah.
Work with other engineers. Yeah, which is a shame. I kind of miss that, actually.
I'm going to be getting to that soon, but after the first Protocol release, there was Force Majeure, which was a live record, then Symbiosis, Another Lifetime, and Out of the Blue. That was 1989 to 1999 or so. After doing an album with the wonderful trio like Gertu, you brought Protocol back in 4 new different phases. Feel free to speak on any of those releases, your current Protocol 5 concert schedule. But my main questions here are, will there possibly be a Protocol 6? And if so, any ideas of the lineup, and would there be plans to tour?
Well, there'll always be plans to tour once we can get back to touring properly. I mean, we've got a very unstable world at the moment, and we have an issue in Europe because they're very near the war. And of course, a lot of the countries, governments are, using their money to help the Ukrainians out. And now, of course, we've got Israel and Gaza. I mean, it's just a mess. So what's happening in the touring scenario, certainly at my level, is a lot of our budgets are being taken away.
Right.
The jazz festivals, which are financed by the government, local governments, they're losing their budgets. So what that means is then instead of getting a reasonable fee, I'm being offered a very unreasonable fee, which means I can't afford to actually tour. So we've got these problems at the moment, but hopefully this will get sorted out and we can get back to touring properly. There'll always be touring. I haven't even started to think about Protocol 6 yet, but yeah, there probably will be one. It takes me a while. Once I write for a record, I'm exhausted. I need to get away from whatever the style was on that particular record, the style of writing, and kind of reinvent myself and try to come up with something a little bit different. Protocol 2 was really supposed to be a jam album. It was 2013, and we had the NAMM show, so Andy Timmons was going to be in LA, and everybody else was in LA. And I said, look, how about I've got my studio, how about we just get to the studio and just throw some stuff down, have some fun. And managed to get everybody booked. And they said, well, do you have anything? I said, well, yeah, I've got a load of demos, but I don't think they're any good. And so I sent them out to everybody, and to my surprise, they're going, this is great. What are you talking about? This will be fantastic. We can all work some stuff out, maybe change a few things, but great ideas. I went, oh, okay, fine. So I, found a few more, and we started recording. And as we were recording that record, I had Andy and Steve Weingart were going over some changes for, I think, a solo section. And I had my headphones on, and I'm thinking, this is worthy of the Protocol name. This should have the name Protocol. This should be the next generation of Protocol. So hence I called it Protocol 2. And then it just kind of went on from there.
Oh, that's fantastic. This next one's going to be a little bit long. I'm a really big fan of your straight ahead jazz album Vantage Point with Jeff Babko around the turn of the millennium.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Everyone always knew how versatile a player and all around tremendous musician you've always been. But I'm not positive just how many fans in the drummer community knew just how hard you swing before the Hiromi gig, of course. I think this record really shows your impeccable jazz chops. Sometimes you would step quarter notes rather than the more standard 2 and 4, which speaks of a direct influence from the immortal Tony Williams, as does your overall energy of the album. Your co-leader even mentions that inspiration in his portion of the liner notes. In your portion of the libretto, you mainly write about tech notes, mics, recording, etc. Can you please tell us what originally inspired you to do this type of jazz project, if you might revisit this type of recording in the future, and also about your affinity for working the studio as an instrument? As an aside, are there artists or projects you are producing and or engineering at the moment?
The inspiration to finally do a bebop album or straight ahead album was Jeff Babko. After I recorded Symbiosis, I wanted to put a band together, and I wanted to put the same band that was in the studio together for the road. But one by one, people couldn't make it. First of all, Ray Russell, the guitar player, he wasn't able to do the tour for various reasons. The next person, Mitch Foreman, he was having a child, and so he wasn't available. But Mitch said, I have just the person that I think would be amazing for you. He's very young. His name's Jeff Babko. And I said, okay, give me his number. So I gave him a call, and I had him come up to the house, and I opened the door, and I saw this kid, basically. And I said, well, come on in. And I'm thinking to myself, how can this 26-year-old play jazz? you know, because I wasn't really familiar with the enormous amount of young jazz players in the States now, and actually in England too. In fact, all over. It's become I learned a lot about this playing with Hiromi, meeting a lot of incredible young players. I didn't think anybody was playing jazz anymore. You know, that's how kind of isolated I guess I was in the rock and roll thing. But I made him a cup of tea and we just started talking. And it was funny. In my mind, he was physically growing older as we were speaking because he had so much knowledge of jazz and stuff. And so anyway, I gave him an audition. I said, well, come play with me and Jimmy Earl. And we played one of the songs from Symbiosis called Mid-Air Decision. And he was stunning. I mean, absolutely stunning. Now, me being British, not full of compliments, and a little suspicious, I said, okay, let's play it again. Which meant there's a long piano solo in it, which meant I could get to hear a second take of a solo, because that's what I was interested in. Am I just going to hear repeats of what he played the first time, or am I going to hear a true soloist that's going to play something totally different? So we play the song again, and lo and behold, a different solo comes out. He was a real jazz player, and I went, wow, he has knowledge. He has shoulders much older. He has a much older head on his shoulders in terms of harmonically, chops, playing, everything. So I said, sounded good, sounded great. I said, Jimmy, come here. And I took Jimmy outside and I said, so what do you think? And Jimmy looks at me, he says, it's fucking amazing. What are you talking about? Are you nuts? He's great. It was really funny. I said, okay. And I went back and I said, Jeff, you got the gig. And that was it. And he just was, I mean, absolutely stunning on that first tour that we did. And we became really good buddies. And we started doing a lot of things together. And I said, and I heard his album, his first jazz album. I said, let's write some original material and do a bebop album. And that's how that happened. So I got to write for the first time straight ahead music. I'd never done that before. You know,
it's a masterpiece.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's very sweet. That's very sweet. I think, I mean, to me, it's got a long way to go, but but you're right. A lot of people were very surprised because they don't realize that I actually started off as a jazz drummer. That's the thing. The first beat I learned was straight ahead, ding, 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 triplet form, straight ahead. Because there's various ways to play that. You can play it in as 16th notes, ding, 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 in slower tempos, or you can play it as triplets, dig, 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 like that. I grew up with the triplet thing because of the more old-fashioned way of playing. Now if I listen to the way Elvin would play a slower tempo, he's playing 16th notes. Roy Haynes, ding, 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 it's a little more chopped. And I think that's what defines all the different drummers is the gap in between those three notes, or rather the first and the second note. That's what gives the groove and the different style, the different sound of a drummer. And of course, the tone of his cymbals. You could always tell a drummer in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and some of the 70s by the sound of their cymbals. And there's a few reasons for that. One, nobody had endorsement cymbals because they had old sets of cymbals which they'd bought. And if they had an endorsement set, they would last for a long time. Then as soon as we started getting like new cymbals all the time and different sets everywhere, I think the personality kind of left. And then the other thing is the recording techniques. We started using more ambient room and stuff. It's different.
Do you remember which specific ride cymbal or ride cymbals you used on Vantage Point?
Absolutely, yeah. I still have them. 22-inch Constantinople medium ride. The hi-hats, I think, were Constantinople's 14-inch. I don't use those anymore. I use Constantinople top with a K brilliant bottom, because I felt the chick sound wasn't strong enough for the way I play. I play straight ahead, probably louder because of the rock and roll thing than most players. So I needed a hi-hat that was a bit more of a chick sound. And by putting a heavier bottom cymbal, which is basically what the new beats are all about, but still has the nice dark tone of the top cymbal, I find that works better. What else did I use? I think for the left-right cymbal, I might have used like a 21-inch, either a K ride or I don't think the Armors had come out by then, so that might have been a K ride, and a couple of Constantinople crash cymbals. I think that was the kit for that. Yeah, and it was just it was 22-inch bass drum. It was the green kit, so it was a Star Classic 12, 13, 14, and 16. I may have only had 2 floor toms. I added a third for other gigs, but I had to reduce because of we had to get onto 16 tracks for 2 DA88s, so I had to lose 1 tom. I think that's what I did. So that was the setup for that album anyway.
Yeah, well, I urge all of our listeners, to check out Vantage Point if they haven't heard it, and if they had, to revisit it.
I think the heads also were suede, Remo suede. I think they were. Yeah, I was looking for that, just more contained sound, a little quieter, a little softer sounding. I think that's what I had on there, if I remember correctly, something like that.
Yeah, I use Remo fiber skins, give that kind of warm tone.
Right. They were either fiber skins or suedes. I can't actually remember, but they weren't my normal clear Ambassador heads.
Can I insert a question here real quick?
Yeah.
And Simon, thank you for indulging us today. I really appreciate you going along with us and going into so many different subjects. Thank you so much.
Sure. Pleasure.
Quick question. This show, I interview a lot of fusion artists, and I also interview a lot of progressive rock artists. And I was just curious if you were a fan of any of those groups, and if you ever met any of those drummers or were inspired by them. Bill Bruford from Yes, Carl Palmer from ELP, of course, Phil Collins from Genesis, Michael Giles from the early King Crimson. Were you into any of that stuff, or ever see any of those groups?
Absolutely. I used to see Mike Giles on sessions.
Oh, wow.
He would come out. I remember one, we went to Marquee Studios. I was coming in for a session. He was just coming out. Hey, how you doing? All that kind of stuff. Of course, I was a huge fan of Yes and Bill. Absolutely. And Phil, of course, Phil Collins. I mean, when he was playing with Brand X,
Oh, yeah, great stuff.
In fact, I actually took over from him in Brand X for a short while.
Wow.
So back in 1976, he asked me to join, if I would join Genesis. But I had to say no, because I was playing with Jack Bruce. We had just signed a deal with Robert Stigwood Records. I couldn't do it. So I had to turn him down. And he said, well, look, can you, I think he might have called me again. Eventually he got Chester Thompson to come in. And I think he called me and said, look, I'm going to be tied up with Genesis. Would you fill in for me with Brand X for a bit? And I said, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. So I actually played with Brand X for quite a while. But we only rehearsed and we did some recording. But the manager, Tony Smith, from Genesis manager, I went to see him. He made me such an insulting offer to play with Brand X. I told him to stuff it, because I was doing sessions.
Right.
I mean, I was earning what he was offering me for a week. I'd earn in one day. I just thought it was really silly. So I said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I was doing this as a favor for Phil, just to fill in for but now they wanted me in the band and, to do stuff. And Yeah. So anyway, so that was the connection with Phil. Mike, of course, with Genesis and with King Crimson, but also who's the original drummer with King Crimson?
Yeah, Mike was, and then it was Ian Wallace and
no, we're missing somebody here.
Mike Giles was the original. He's on the first album and the second.
But there's somebody else, and I can't get his name. Double bass drum player.
Was he maybe on one of the later albums before Bruford joined? There's a gap in there. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. It's escaping me.
He was playing with was he playing with Michael Schenker at one point? I think I met him at a concert. Oh, what was his name? Clive Bunker.
Oh, Jethro Tull.
From Jethro Tull.
Oh,
That's it.
Jethro Tull. Tull. Sorry, got mixed up.
Quite progressive in their own right, honestly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Jethro Tull, my favorite band. In fact, it was the first rock and roll concert I ever went to.
Barrymore Barlow.
Yeah, and what a beautiful drummer.
Oh, they had some amazing drummers.
I love Thick as a Brick was my favorite album. Probably still is.
I love it. Yeah, it's probably my favorate Tull album. Did you ever run across Gentle Giant?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't know them as well, but I was totally aware of them. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh boy, they have ways of taking four and syncopating it in such a way you feel like you're listening to odd meters, even though you're not. That's an art, really. Do you have any memories? What's that?
Soft Machine.
Oh yeah, of course.
John Marshall, drummer. Nucleus. I mean, these are all British. Very
How about
British.
Hatfield in the North and National Health?
Of course.
Oh yeah, the Canterbury scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really nice stuff. It's kind of like jazz meets prog meets Monty Python. A lot of those bands. There's a lot of humor in there.
It was interesting, but I think I was more into American music, and funnily enough, I was more into like Stax and Motown and the Philly sound. One of my favorite albums to play along to as a kid was Shaft, Isaac Hayes.
Love it. Yeah.
I love playing along Quincy Jones. I used to play along to his records, Marvin Gaye. So that was big. There was a big heavy influence for me back in those days.
One other thing I wanted to ask about was playing on the Burning for Buddy project with Neil from Rush. That was his big inspiration. I was wondering if you had any memories of being part of that and hanging out with him, and any thoughts on his playing.
Burning for Buddy. Yeah, that was an interesting scenario. I wasn't actually supposed to do it until the day of. We'd been going backwards and forwards about it, and I don't know. It was negotiations were a bit weird. Let's put it like that. But anyway, we got that sorted out, and then so I had been doing a clinic, I think, in Philly, and the guy from Tama, Joe Hibbs, was driving me into the city to the power station to record. So I had to learn the songs on the way in on a cassette. Or probably cassette actually, and do like a quick chop. So anyway, I turn up and drum kit's all set up and stuff, and I meet Neil for the first time, who was absolutely lovely. I'd never met him before. I have to admit, I wasn't a huge Rush fan. It was mainly because in England we weren't so aware of Rush,
Right.
Also a little bit, we weren't so aware of Journey. These were two bands that really didn't quite make it in certainly not in the circles I was in London at that time. But I knew the band, I was aware of them, but it didn't strike me the same way as it did people here, I guess. I think that's what it was. But I mean, Neil was a great player, obviously. But I wouldn't be able to tell you, which album did I like or anything like that, because I was into different stuff, simple. But he was absolutely lovely, and he was a wonderful producer. We got on very well. It was. There's a certain way to record a big band. You have to be close together. You got to be set up like a big band. There's only one way to record it. You can't start separating it because something is missing groove-wise, and that's what I felt. Not that I'm not a very good big band player. I haven't played that style for so long, but I do know how it should feel, and that's what was missing for me. And it's not to do. The players were great. It was just awkward. I just felt it's not really gelling because I'm not feeling the band. This is not like how you record a big band, you know. That's it. And of course, playing a kit like mine, I don't know. It's not really right for that kind of music. That's how I felt about it. I also feel I think something happened with the ambience mics because the sound on my tracks it's a little indistinct. And I think there was a bit of a mix-up with the routing somewhere. I had heard about something about this after the sessions, so I wasn't very happy with the way my kit sounded. Anyway, let's just put it like that. We did, however, record 3 tunes. So in that space of that time, we did it quite quickly, and I got to play, one of my favorite Buddy Rich songs. Which is Goodbye Yesterday. Just love that arrangement. It might be a Hank Levy arrangement. Maybe that's why I like it. I was a big fan of Hank Levy's writing with Stan Kenton and Don Ellis, So it was an interesting scenario, I listened to all the other performances, Steve, Gad and Billy, and one of my favorite performances is actually Matt Sorum's.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think he sounded fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it's just cohesion. It just worked for me. It worked, So, but these, I'm coming at it from a different angle. I'm listening for different things. And the one thing I do listen to is groove and cohesion, how everybody plays with each other. I think that's just so important,
Well, it was an interesting variety of drummers on it. I mean, it's rare to see so many big names all on one thing, and it was interesting.
It's amazing
that Neil had the urge to do it. Some people are like, "What?
Yeah.
Rock guys making a jazz album? How can that work?" But
yeah. I know it is interesting and great. Hats off to Neil for undertaking the production of it. I think he did a great job.
Absolutely. Well, rest in peace. He is missed.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I never really got to know Neil. I never got to hang with him. So yeah, that's the one and only time I met him, and we, got on great. Had a few chats, and that was it. And that was it.
Well, it's a great memory. Eric, you got one more. We probably should wrap it up.
Yep. I just have one more. My final question for you is how you go about organizing odd phrases, odd groupings, odd meters, cross rhythms, counting, etc. I know you read, write, and chart, but are there certain click track subdivisions and sounds you prefer in the studio? I remember your earlier DCI video where the 33/8 phrase made huge waves in the drumming community. That can obviously be broken down into smaller chunks in today's methods. Do you have a more modernized way to organize those odd phrases?
Listen to the music.
Perfect.
Let's just listen to the music,
Yep.
It's, look, I mean, I got that purely from a Don Ellis record, which was
Makes
a
sense.
song Bulgarian Bulge, Misha Lviv, and Bulgarian is actually a very quite well-known folk song in Bulgaria. And to me, I learned all my odd meter playing by playing along with Don Ellis records and Stan Kenton records. I mean, literally. And of course, Mahavishnu. So at the end of the day, there is only a bar of 2 and a bar of 3.
Yep.
It's all within 2s and 3s.
Yep.
And it's all how you perceive it. One of the problems back in the, going back a few years when we started playing in odd meters, everybody kind of played it one bar at a time. We don't play 4/4 like that. So I started trying to get used to it and playing across the bar line, subdividing, or even making 2 bars into one, a slow 7. So instead of thinking of a 7/8 as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, like this, think of it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, like that. It's so much freer.
Yeah, the quarter note pulse over the bar.
Exactly. That's how I always do it. And then in terms of writing, when I write these odd meter, so on every album I usually do one that's a very challenging song. And on Protocol 2, there's Upside In, Downside Up. On Protocol 3, there's Catalyst, which is in 17. On Protocol 4, didn't really have one, actually, I don't think. Did it? No, I don't think Protocol 4 had that kind of weird time. It had a couple of things in 7, I think, but that was actually much straighter, that record. And then Protocol 5 had Unde Verginti, which was in 19. Now, I think a lot of people think that when I write, it always starts on the drum kit. Actually, the drum kit's the last thing that I play. It's all up here. And that started during COVID, and I was making breakfast, and I came up with this melody, which was very kind of Bulgarian folky type of melody. And that's where it came. And I didn't know what time it was in. I didn't care. What I was caring about was, this is kind of a cool melody. I like this. And I switched my boiled eggs off and ran through to the studio, fired everything up while still singing it. And then when Pro Tools was up and running, started to pick out the notes and pop it into Pro Tools, and then looped it. And I went, this is a 19. Wow, cool. So then I put the time signature in and then had a bar line, and it worked out. So when I made the demo of, actually, when I made all the demos for Protocol 5, I sent them to the band. And then a couple of days later, I got a call from Otmaro Ruiz, he comes from Venezuela, and he grew up playing Latin music. And I said, this 19 song, because they all had working titles, and that had the simple working title of 19. That's all it had, And he said, this tune 19, said, what's the clave? I went, the clave? He said, yeah, because if I can get the clave, then I can get the groove, I can get the meter. And I thought about it, and I went, what a beautiful way to think about that. So I came up with an instant clave. I said, well, how about this? There it is. There's your clave 19. And he went, fantastic, thank you. Isn't that great? So
that's wonderful.
What that explains is that's how you have to take it on board. You've got to feel it. You've just got to feel it, and subdivide into 3s and 2s. That's it, and it's a pattern.
That's how I do it.
Yeah. So, but you just have to get used to doing it. That's all. And I think if you're not used to playing, I notice myself, if I don't play on those weird meters, if I don't play on David Ginty for a while, and I have, I've been playing all sorts of, other records, mostly in 4, and suddenly we go into rehearsal and we have to play on David Ginty. I'm like, oh wow, I have to get it around my head again, But and the whole band has to too, But it's just a matter of what you're used to doing. But think of it always as though you were playing 4, because it shouldn't sound difficult. It should have a groove. That's the thing. That's the important bit.
I agree.
Cool.
Excellent.
All right.
That's a great takeaway. Definitely.
Lovely. Thank you.
Well, Simon,
Thank you so much for your time.
is there anything you'd like to share with our viewers before we wrap it up?
I think I've shared everything.
I think so. I think so. What's next for you besides dinner?
Well, actually, right now I'm doing a record right now for an Italian artist. I'm just recording drum tracks. I need to have a listen to the one I did yesterday, and maybe fix a couple of parts in it, and then got 2 more tracks to do. So I'm going to do that I don't even know what time it is, for the rest of the afternoon. But the next thing I have is protocol. We're going to rehearsals for the NAMM show on the 25th. We're playing at the Tama 50th anniversary show, which is on the 26th at the Anaheim House of Blues. And then we are playing the Catalina's in LA, in Hollywood, for 2 nights. And then we're going up to Oakland to play 2 nights in Yoshi's. So that's what's coming up. And then right after that, I'm going into a production mode. I'm producing an artist for another record. So that's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for indulging us today. It's been a really enlightening journey, and can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we really
Much love
appreciate
to
your
you.
time, Simon.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very
It's
much.
been an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
All right.
Well, have a great 2024, Simon.
And you guys too. Thank you very much.
Thank
Our
you.
pleasure. Take
All
care.
right.